All right, ready?
Yeah, you got to call a roll for me so I can write everybody down, please.
All right, so let's call the meeting to order. First meeting of the year 2021. This is the Monday, January 25th, 2021 meeting of the Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel. So I will call the roll for quick introductions and for attendance purposes. Myself, John Mahoney, appointed by the Select Board of the Town of Plymouth, Massachusetts. Mr. O'Brien.
Pat O'Brien, Manager of Government Affairs and Communications for the for CDI and a representative of Holtec.
Mr. Grassi.
You're on mute.
All right, Pine, you got that, right? You got Rich?
Yeah, I got Rich.
Okay. Ms. Dubois.
Pine Dubois, appointed by the Speaker of the House. Former Speaker of the House. I'm wondering a little bit if I have to get renewed by the new Speaker of the House or how that works exactly. I don't know.
I don't think we need to complicate anything. I'm sure nobody's going to call.
I'm not known for complicating anything.
Okay. Mr. Rothstein.
Yeah, Rich Rothstein, Plymouth Board of Selectmen appointee.
Mr. Lawson.
Evening, Mark Lawson, CDI, Radiation Protection, Chemistry Manager.
Ms. Dave Noyes.
Thanks. Sorry, Dave Noyes, Senior Manager Compliance, CDI.
Mary Waldron.
Mary Waldron, Old Colony Planning Council.
Mary Lampert.
Mary Lampert, Senate President.
John Moylan.
Yep. Good evening, John Moylan. I'm the site vice president for Pilgrim Station.
Mr. Jones.
Robert Jones, Executive Office of Health and Human Services, representing Secretary Mary Lou Sutters.
Okay. Mr. Drabinski, you're a guest, special guest tonight?
Yes, I am. John Drabinski with ERM. I'm a geologist and a licensed site professional.
Mr. Gerard Martin.
Gerard Martin, I'm with Mass DEP, Bureau of Wayside Cleanup in the Lakeville office.
Okay. Susan.
Massachusetts Executive Office of Housing and Economic Development, representing Secretary Mike Keneally.
Jack Priest.
Jack Priest, representing the Department of Public Health Radiation Control Program.
Robert Hayden.
Good afternoon. Bob Hayden, Department of Public Utilities.
Dave Johnson.
Hi, Dave Johnston, Mass DEP, representing Secretary Therides.
Mr. O'Reilly.
Kevin O'Reilly, Town of Plymouth, appointed by the Speaker of the House.
And Mr. Daly.
Hi here, Matt Daly with Environmental Resources Management. I'm a technical director there. I work with John Drabinski, the LSP.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Previous minutes, we haven't met in 60 days. The last meeting in November. Anybody have any concerns on the meeting minutes from November meeting?
Motion to approve.
Or a second?
Second.
Who seconded? Sorry.
Kevin.
Kevin O'Reilly.
Thank you.
All right, all those in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
All those I'm in favor. All those opposed?
Looks.
Any abstentions? All right, Pine, it looks like it's unanimous.
Yep. Thank you.
Question.
Yes, Miss Lampert.
In the minutes, page 4, Mrs. Lampert asked about whether the warranty would be voided in certain circumstances.
Sorry.
Mr. O'Brien stated that he would double check on the issue.
Yeah, and I didn't find anything. Like I said, we are the responsible party for the cask, and as the manufacturer, there's nothing I could find that would cause that related to our stuff here. Like I said to Jim, you know, the warranty is considered business sensitive, and I gave him the contact of the the lawyer if he wanted to try to get it from Holtec directly. But like I said, we are the licensed owner of the facility and the licensed manufacturer of the cast, so we're responsible to ensure they stay in compliance with NRC regulations.
So
Just a point-
you don't
just
have
a-
an answer to the question.
Point of order.
Go ahead, Mr. Jack.
So we're reviewing the minutes from the last meeting. The minutes reflected that question was asked. The response should be part of the new meeting. It does not have to be included in the minutes from the last. So that should be an agenda item for us to follow up on today, and and the response would be captured in today's minutes.
Right. Agreed.
And also on page 6, and I've written these questions to you prior to the meeting. Mrs. Turco asked if during an earthquake, the expended fuel pool could sustain any damage.
Mary, Mary, can you say what page and what number in
Says
the
page 632.
Thanks.
And so I asked questions, could sustain any damage, and what were the assumptions on what level of earthquake? And Patrick O'Brien said he would confirm, but the pool was designed for the largest earthquake, which doesn't really say anything, because what was the largest earthquake assumed? Because we know from Commissioner Barron that post the earthquake in Virginia, that we have increased susceptibility to larger earthquakes. So maybe that could be answered at some point.
Yeah.
Mary, anything else?
No, that was from the minutes that
Yeah.
drew my attention. And fine, the first question was page 4, line 42 on warranty.
Page 4, line 42.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Those are outstanding questions.
Yep.
Just point of order. We could
Go ahead,
carry
Jack.
those, point of order, sorry.
That's okay. Go ahead.
So we could carry, when we have questions that either come up from the public section, or we have questions that come up from members of the NDCAP that we need follow-up on, as we did in these minutes, we would capture them, and then for the next agenda meeting, you could carry those until those answers are satisfactorily answered. So that could be a standard agenda item, questions from the previous NDCAP meeting, and then they would be documented and captured in the minutes. So what we're approving right now are what were the minutes from the last meeting, not responses to the questions. And no disrespect to Ms. Lampert. I think that will make it more efficient for us in the future. And then we have the questions documented, and then we have the responses documented.
Excellent.
Yeah, if I may, I heard that we had already approved minutes.
That's correct.
Right.
In
Good point.
in this agenda, you'll see number 9, topics for next and future meeting. I think that would be a good place to put this in and carry it on from there, unless you want an additional agenda item at every meeting that says leftover items or something like that. Jack.
That'd be a good idea.
I think we could, I think we could create a separate agenda item where we just list the questions that come from the panel member or the public. And then as those are answered, they would be deleted from that question list.
Gotcha.
So it would
Okay.
just be an additive list that we would track as an agenda item for each meeting.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
One more point. So
Go ahead,
when
Jim.
we capture the question, we should also document who did the question go to, so we can get that response from the individual. For example, if it was to the Department of Public Health, I'd be the responsible person to answer that question and bring a response back to a subsequent meeting.
Okay, Pine, you good with that? I think that's a great suggestion, so. All right, moving on. Mr. O'Brien, you have an update of
Yep, let me just
what
share
you've been
my,
up to the last 60 days? Thank you.
yeah, let me just share my screen, John, and I'll get going. All right, everyone should be seeing my screen. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So thank you, everyone. This is our January meeting and January update. So as you're all familiar with, we start off pretty much every meeting as to where we are in the draft schedule for planning purposes. You see that red line has moved up, and we are, I think, more poignantly to this meeting, going to focus on that characterization piece that I'll have a couple colleagues speak to where we are right here. We have completed the PA construction, which I'll speak to a little bit in a minute, and we are in the middle of the reactor vessel internal segmentation. So let me go from there. So we've been working on and completed in December the steam dryer segmentation. That work was done safely and on time, and we are in the process of doing the steam separator, which commenced on January 7th. This is an internal model, just kind of showing you what the dryer and separator are. And I might just ask Dave Noyes to give the technical perspective. Pine had asked me kind of as a one-off what the dryer and separator do or did back in the day.
Both of them are designed to remove moisture from the steam before it exits the reactor vessel on its way to the turbine when the plant was operating. So the steam dryer is a bunch of chevron plates that created a tortuous path where any moisture would collect on the plates and then flow back down into the vessel. The steam separator are essentially conical vanes that do the same thing. They create a tortuous path that the steam can follow to exit, where the water gets caught on the that conical shaped tube and drains back down to the vessel.
Thanks, Dave. Pine, go ahead. I think you're still on mute, though. Pine, you're still on mute.
Dave, you said chevron tubes. Is there a special? Is it a metal? Is it ceramic? Is it?
It's metal. It's a corrugated metal.
Thanks.
So essentially, in cross section, it would look like an accordion, but it is all steel.
Okay, great. Thanks very much. I appreciate knowing a little more.
Thanks. And as you can see, they are quite heavy. The dryer was 54,000 pounds, the separator 96,000 pounds. So we've been getting ready for the top guide, which is the next thing that will be scheduled for segmentation. And we have
one other question on the steam separator, etc. Seeing as how the steam comes out of the core, I would think there'd be quite a bit of contamination.
Mark, can you speak to
correct?
The levels?
Pardon me?
No, I'm asking Mark to speak to that.
Yeah, the moisture separator, as far as the surface areas and the surfaces themselves, despite, in addition to activation, there is a crud layer that is hardened and deposited on the surfaces of the moisture separator, which does have high levels of contamination in MRAD levels, if you're familiar with that.
Mm-hmm.
So go ahead, Mary. I was gonna say that I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, it does. And the question is, okay, where are the pieces now?
We've segmented about 43 of the riser tubes at the moment, and we have baskets that are in the dryer separator pit, and we have a population of about 18 in each of these baskets that will be raised from the water and put into an Alara shield, which is residing into a type A container, which you see in the tan container on the right-hand side there of that picture.
So Mark, just to help my peers out, they're probably not familiar with terms like MRAD, and you could just say they're highly contaminated deposit level on the steel that contributes to the dose rates. And what you see on the left picture, I believe, is the white. You can see underwater, those are the baskets, right?
Correct.
And then they get a lid put on them, and then that basket is put into the brown steel container, shielded container, which is, how is that top sealed?
Has a lid and it's torque. So,
okay.
So all the
then-
segmentation is, I'm just gonna help Jack a little bit too, is everything's done underwater. And we cut the pieces, so nothing is done outside of the water. The pieces are segmented, placed carefully in the box. Each piece is weighed. We know what the dose rates are and the weights to be in compliance with the shipping container prior to shipping it to the repository, which is in Texas right now. Sorry, Jack.
Yep, thanks, John. That helps. So Mary, what you're seeing on the right-hand picture is the Type A DOT approved shipping container.
And so that goes by truck to Texas.
Yeah, it looks like it's on a flatbed, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Low boy.
Last Monday.
Okay. Is there notification required of anybody?
Yep. We make all the required notifications with the state and local communities as needed.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. So yeah, as we were saying, those first 4 Class A waste boxes did leave site last 2 on Monday, 2 on Tuesday. We'll continue to ship those waste boxes through the first and second quarters of 2021. Just to bring you back a little bit to where we previously had removed those what we called the S110 Butler buildings, and we created the staging area for Class B and C waste before they are transported. Ultimately, we've been putting those Lego blocks together, and as you can see, we have a gantry crane that will begin to load those B and C class boxes into the temporary staging area prior to shipping. So we'll begin that staging in February.
For my peers, Class A, Class B, Class C. Class A is the least radioactive. Class C is the most radioactive. So that's why the Type A go into those shipping containers readily, and then for efficiency's sake, you transport more than one at a time. What you see on those gray, as Pat called them, Lego blocks, those are actually shield blocks. So as they collect the B and C for efficiency standpoint, you can move those B and C class waste storage containers into those shield blocks before they're again picked up and moved to a transport vehicle for disposal.
Hey, Jack, why don't we just close the circle here and talk about greater than Class C so that folks know all 4 categories and what happens to those 4
Okay,
categories.
so I'm just for this picture here for my peers. So I asked, so you're creating an outside storage area on the site with these Lego blocks that also have a cap. They're robust shielding. I asked, and Holtec is also providing monitoring it like the fence line and inside the protected area to ensure that when they move the waste to those containers, that they're not creating any additional exposure beyond the fence line as they are temporarily held awaiting transport.
So greater than Class C is more radioactive. in A, B, and C are the containers or containments that are used to be putting that into the structure or component for transport different than what we're seeing here, or more robust, I gather.
So I'll let Mark talk a little bit about, or John Moylan, what's their intent for greater than Class C waste? And I think it would be useful if we provided an example of that.
Greater than Class C
So
waste.
Jack, you led off with, taking actions, and we'll take an action to show it's gonna go, our GTCC waste will go on the pad in a, they call it a non-fuel container, but it's similar to the Holtec designed fuel cans. So we'll show what that looks like, and maybe go a little bit deeper into what GTCC is and how much volume there's going to be.
Sure. So the Class C type things are materials that they've stored on site previously, things like primary resin that would contain a lot of, the resins used to clean up the reactor coolant to make it ultra pure are captured on those resins. Those resins have to be changed out every few years. The old resin is put into a type C canister, a very robust, highly shielded canister. And that's the type of things that are with type C waste. So pieces and components of the reactor vessel structure that are not fuel, that meet that criteria for B and C is what would be stored in these canisters awaiting shipment for disposal.
Right, so I was hoping the takeaway here, as you're hearing from all of us cover it, is the level of RAD concern or emissions go up from A, B to C. A, B, and C are handled appropriately, ultimately for offsite transport in the near term. Greater than Class C, as it stands right now, is planned to stay on the IFAC along with spent fuel.
That's correct. There is no insight disposal of greater than Class C at this time.
Two quick questions.
ahead, Mary.
One, you said, Jack, that Holtec measures closely the B waste before it goes into the block. Do you get reports of that monitoring or take part in it on behalf of the Commonwealth? Question number one. Question number two, what is the Holtec canister that is taking the Class C waste? And is that acceptable at a repository? I always thought that Class C waste would go into the same Holtec canister. I guess now they're 100M or something, than the assemblies.
So if I got your correction for the state, does Holtec provide us information on the monitoring of those canisters as they're loaded? The question is, the answer to that is no, they're not required to. They follow their DOT and NRC shipping regulations to ensure that they meet the requirements for shipping. And your second question is, are they allowed to bury greater than Class C waste? I'm sorry.
No.
Second question is, are they allowed to bury Class C waste?
No. Class C, I understood. Greater than Class C.
Yeah.
You're supposed to go to a Yucca Mountain type deep geological repository. If they arrive in canisters that are not the same as assemblies, does that cause a problem? Because I thought that greater than Class C also went into the same type of canisters as the spent fuel.
You are essentially correct, Mary. My understanding is that greater than Class C will be stored on the FSC in canisters, I believe, exactly like the canisters used for the spent fuel. Mark Lawson, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Correct.
Thanks.
Okay. All right, so I just want to provide an update on where we are with the new ISFISI work and the upcoming dry fuel campaign. So the new ISFISI pad construction has been complete and turned over to the site. The vehicle barrier system, which is that wall you're seeing on the pictures, that is complete. We have 34 fuel casks to be loaded for the final campaign, and that will begin this coming spring. And we're still working through, so one of the AG settlement agreements on top of the facing that you see on the wall was for an enhanced planting proposal. We've been working very diligently with DEP to provide them what they need. Because of the proximity to the soil absorption systems from the wastewater treatment facility, we've gone through and looked at what it would take to remove some of those leaching pits. No longer needed. Our system, for the daily flow that we have is well above what we need and will need going forward. So we're looking to take out 12 of those absorption systems and then provide the enhanced plantings to the Commonwealth. DJ and I talk fairly regularly on this, and right now I think it's the technical piece of the removal of those systems is where we're sitting with the state. Speaking of just the wastewater treatment facility, and site waste. Just want to let Dave Noyes provide just something as a notification that we made last week to both EPA and the state regarding one of the holding tanks on site.
So we had during a walk down identified a condition where there was an overflow to ground level of a waste storage tank. It essentially is a settling tank that then discharges through lift stations to our wastewater treatment plant. From the time that it was identified until the time that actions were taken to stop the leakage, there was at most 100 gallons that went from the cover of the tank to an adjacent storm sewer. That created a reportable condition. Was reported to the EPA and the MDEP in accordance with the site's NPDES permit. That notification was not timely in accordance with the regulation. Specifically, that notification was supposed to have taken place within 24 hours due to some confusion as to whether the tank held water or sewage. We ended up making that report late, but both a verbal and then follow-up written reports were provided to the EPA and DEP.
Patrick, it's hard to tell from the how tall the wall is, the vehicle barrier wall, and the width. Is it pretty uniform in terms of its dimensions? And
yeah, 4 feet tall. I don't know the width offhand, but I know they're 4 feet tall. And then I don't know the lineage off the top of my head either.
Assuming wide enough to stop a vehicle, though.
Yeah, that's what they're designed for.
Yeah, I forget exactly, Pat, but I think it was like 3 or 4 feet wide. They were pretty robust.
Yeah. Yeah, Rich, if you ever want to come up and see them, come down the site. I'll bring you up and you can see them.
Yeah, I was out there today, Rich, and I can't imagine anything going through that thing, honestly.
Sounds good.
But can I just go back to your holding tank for a second, Dave? So was there a test that was done on that, and was that a discharge to the storm sewer in the bay, or was that contained and controlled?
It was contained within the storm sewer system. So there's approximately, more than 1,000 gallons, specifically about 61,000 gallons in the interconnecting piping from the the 12-inch pipe to the discharge to where it eventually gets to the permitted outfall. So that volume was contained within that piping.
So how do you deal with that? Do you have to, you're testing it to see if you have to pump it out or treat it or something, or?
Yeah, it essentially will be diluted with rainwater. The water itself was gray water. It was what bubbled up through a cap. There were no solids.
Gotcha.
There was no visible odor, but it was classified as septic water.
Yeah, maybe Pine, I can add a little bit to that to put it in context. You know, what Dave is talking about is termed as a sanitary sewer overflow, an SSO.
Yeah, I just wanted to be sure that's what we were talking about rather than a mixed tank of some sort, that's all.
Right, and it is. This is domestic wastewater that was en route from the toilet facilities to the wastewater discharge facility, where it would normally go up, get treated, and then be discharged to the soil absorption system that Pat was just talking about. And what we had here is a clog and about 100 gallons that made its way outside of the, contained piping for the sewer and made it into the discharge. We see these frequently. This, in the grand scheme of, is this a severe one? This is really a very small one. We do have some substantial ones that we're working on. So the requirement here, there's not a violation relative to the fact that this occurred from the blockage. We look for folks to promptly address the blockage, which happened here. What didn't happen as timely as it was required to occur, and that's the notification. It's a 24-hour notification, and I think the notification was a day or two late. The follow-up with the after-action report was timely within the 5-day window. So we have a full accounting of what happened, and we may issue a notice, in concert with EPA relative to the lateness of the notification to us. But again, in terms of the grand scheme of sewer overflows that we see, this is a small one.
I would agree with that. I'm not trying to register a concern. I was just trying to really understand whether it was strictly sewer. I do have a question about the 12 soil absorption systems you're taking out. Are those leaching systems? Are they concrete structures? Or can you just describe that for us a little bit, Pat?
I was gonna, but I was like, DJ might be the expert on it. It's
okay.
Sure, I'll take a crack at that. So the way the Pilgrim wastewater discharge works is they have a wastewater treatment facility that is permitted for, I believe, 38,000 gallons a day. And then it discharges to a distribution box. And then out of that distribution box, so distribution box doesn't have any effluent released into the ground. It's still going through its process. So it goes to a distribution box after treatment. That gets cut up and gets sent out to basically 6 other distribution boxes. And so one big D box to 2 quite large distribution boxes. Each of those large distribution boxes go to 3 distribution boxes. And then each of those now total 6 distribution boxes go to 6 infiltration pits. And it's kind of like a spider, if you will. So there's like 6 D boxes that send the effluent out in equal quantity of treated effluent to each of 6 pits where it infiltrates, soil absorption system where it infiltrates. And that is substantially oversized for the flow now that the facility's no longer employing a lot of folks. So the way these were aligned on the property really limited how much we could accomplish with the vegetative screening, recognizing that this is a vegetative screening. But we've been urging Pilgrim, as has the town, to have a robust vegetative screening looking towards the future. And what Holtec CTI has been looking at is giving up 1/3 of their infiltration capacity, which they do not need, but giving that up so that they can have a more robust planting array in front of this vehicle barrier, which would be far enough away to meet all of their NRC requirements for line of sight, but balance that with providing a robust visual screen from Rocky Hill Road. So that's the balance we're trying to strike. And it was really, we weren't able to get as far along as we thought we could get without abandoning 1/3 of the distribution or infiltration system. So that's where we stand on that.
Yeah, and I think to DJ's point, just, initially we looked at, abandoning more of a cluster towards the wall, but the way the system's designed, if you take out one pit on each D box, you need to take out one pit across the board. So we took out two. So it's a straight line of pits that are getting taken out.
So
Just
actually,
a correction, for understanding, this 4-foot barrier wall, does it simply parallel Rocky Hill Road, or is it essentially 360 degrees around the ISP, or 180 degrees, or what?
Mary, go up there, Mary.
Yeah, you can come up and see it, Mary, if you want, anytime. But
I have you can't answer.
no, I was going to answer is it doesn't just parallel Rocky Hill Road. If you drive down Rocky Hill Road, you can see where it goes up and around. I believe it's just about 360 all the way around.
So it's about 360. Yeah,
Yeah.
'cause I was picturing a car.
Yeah.
I would highly recommend anyone who hasn't been down there on site, follow up with Mr. O'Brien. He can take you through there. It's worth the visit.
And even with COVID, we have precautions, and we can do it. Pine was down there today, like I said, so we can make it work for anybody that wants to come down. All right. If there's no more questions, I'll move on. Just wanted to give kind of an update on what we're looking at for 2021 when it comes to really the demolition piece of our work. So we're looking at some of these exterior storage tanks that are no longer needed. So one of the 2 firewater storage tanks, we're in the process of getting that permitted for removal. We'll be looking to take down the demin tank and the condensate storage tanks later in 2021. We'll be starting internal demolition of the condenser bay second quarter 2021. And we've recently begun removal of the hydraulic control units removal from the reactor building with the east side HCU is looking to be removed by the end of this week, I believe. The former access authorization control building, it's where we housed our access authorization department. We're moving them into the engineering support building now. So we're relocating those staff members tomorrow and the equipment. And then we'll be looking at demolish that small building adjacent to the ESB come February. And then when it comes to the on-site area, we're looking to remove the rigging loft potentially by February. And the old executive building, which if those of you have been following the plant long enough, was where the original site VP used to sit, down connected to the turbine building down that end. So we'd be looking to do internal demolition of that in the first quarter and external demolition second quarter, pending the results of the engineering instructional analysis that we have in place. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark with John and Matt to assist him on site characterization.
All right, good evening, Mark Lawson. I'll begin with the sound check. All good?
All good, Mark.
All right. This slide is a recap of the map depicting the industrial portion of the licensed property. The industrial portion being that of 133 acres, which is parcel 1B, 1 Bravo. It's broken down into sample and survey zones, which I think in November we used this map to explain this. This includes the north and south protected area, east, west, and south owner controlled areas, each with further breakdown to subzones 1 and 2, and the discharge canal. Larger sections in the east, west, and south owner controlled areas are covered by trees and heavy vegetation. That said, looking at it, may appear likely that some of these larger areas have not been impacted by historical use of radioactive and non-radioactive materials, but not all portions of these large owner controlled areas were not specifically identified as non-impacted in the historical site assessment. So these areas were subdivided into the 2 subzones, each that you see to facilitate reclassification of the east, west, and south sub-area 1s as non-impacted and east, west, and south area 2s as impacted radiological class 3 in accordance with new reg guidance going into these into planning these areas. The non-radiological program also developed in compliance with MCP, Massachusetts Contingency Plan. The next slide is a follow-up of previous path forward items that we presented from the previous NDCAP meeting in November. We have worked with and continue to work with state and DPH to provide additional available information in order to fulfill requirements of the ESA work plan. We do have bi-weekly meetings with our stakeholders scheduled and agendas established going forward to discuss all site activity progress to include characterization. The state has reviewed and commented on additional information being initially provided. Some of the information being sample and survey plans for characterization, proposed work, and supporting schedules that Pat goes over here in the NDCAP. And the historical site assessment was provided, which was the one completed back in December of 18. The site characterization execution for our phase 1 industrial portion is field complete as of December 23rd. And when I say complete, that's the initial plans that were put forth in this phase 1. All external lab results are expected to be received by tomorrow, the 26th. And this is the receipt of all the raw data of sample points taken throughout. And from here, the team compiles the data and looks for any single independent sample anomalies, reportability thresholds, etc. The phase 1 report activities and results are due the first week of March. The draft report to be provided mid-February for review and comment with our LSP. And finally, the last bullet, will amend the ESA work plan by May 31st of this year. This is to incorporate the results of the phase 1 sampling and any areas warranted for further sampling or any extended conditions that are identified. Slide 3, the next breakdown here is a breakdown of the sample and surveying population. I just want to give you an understanding of the initial samples that have been performed since we started execution of phase 1 here in the field on October 6th through December 23rd. We did fixed point measurements, which is a static count type measurement where you're holding the probe for a certain period of time. Scans, smears being a fixed surface area swipe of 100 square centimeter area. Samples were taken on or in the structures and areas of interest as identified in the corresponding field plans. And as part of the field inspections for non-radiological, when they're out in the field, as far as inspections there, in addition to taking samples, there's visual surface discoloration, check odors, etc. So we perform gamma scans where a radiological control specialist is in the field with a low-level detector instrument, sodium iodide as an example, and is looking for fluctuations in low-level background of gamma radiation. And inside the buildings, as another example of instruments, we use a proportional counter as well. So we survey structural boundaries. The HSA points out 144 items of interest. And as far as the industrial portion, we're surveying these areas in the zones, any cracks in surfaces, volumetric sampling in the open land areas, soil, sediment, concrete samples. Sample points were both directly chosen. And these are sample points that we have in the sample plans, directly chosen based on any historical events of information that we have. And also randomly generated population for each area for proposed non-impacted areas. And this follows New Reg 1575 And again, for non-radiological, the MCP. For radiological needs, we processed more than 1,450 field characterization volumetric samples, smears, and direct measurements. We've collected another 250 soil samples as backup for future potential analysis in case we need to bound any areas of investigation if required, which will help with our data quality assessment. Submitted a little over 400 non-radiological samples for lab analysis, which includes a QA/QC population. We completed 51 boring locations of varying depths, collecting analytical samples, as well as 30 surface soil samples, which is down to about 6 inches in depth. Collected groundwater samples from 15 of our existing wells and an additional 19 geoprobe borings. That's generally going, geoprobe is a constant sampling that occurs in 5-foot increments, and the depth will depend on where the water table is. So the intent of these geoprobe samples is to go about 5 feet into the water table. We've collected 251 building characterization samples and also QA split samples that we're starting with DPH state. We shipped some of that, our ending samples to the offsite lab for analysis, and we shared those samples with DPH for tritium. Remaining volumetric sample, remaining volume available for that. So there's additional opportunity for splits as we compile our sample data and close gaps to unknowns. As stated in our last presentation, the process is iterative, will continue to be ongoing and repetitive as we continue to add samples and surveys of newly exposed areas while demo progresses. And also the upcoming phase 2, which next slide depicts the various licensed site parcels as outlined in yellow, with the non-licensed property shown in blue or turquoise, depending on how your eyes see it. Phase 1 included parcel 1 Bravo, as I mentioned before. Phase 2 includes parcels 1 Alpha, which is about 9.5 acres. Parcel 2 is about 87 acres, and parcel 6-525, which is about 287 acres. Centrally located within all these parcels lies a triangle portion of land. You can see it on the slide there. That is not part of the licensed property.
Actually owned by the town of Plymouth, just in case people were curious. Yeah, that triangle, I see pines. Yeah, that triangle piece is owned by the town of Plymouth. There was a tax title property taken, I forget how many years ago when I looked it up.
And they kept it.
Yes.
That's interesting.
Pine, can you believe it?
No, they must have wanted a foothold for some reason.
So parcel 6-525 includes property adjacent to both sides of the Powerhouse Road. Phase 2 characterization is approved for work. Initial planning is commenced. We're just getting underway here with validation of our outer licensed property coordinates. We'll have a historical site assessment amendment to incorporate these outer licensed property parcels. The HSA that was finalized in December of 18 included the industrial portion of the property. So we have field implementation in late March and April, and a final report to follow. So as I said, we do have a few sample results coming in here the first couple of days this week from our external labs. To date, no results have prompted immediate notifications to our external stakeholders. And from now into February, the team's reviewing all the sample data, and conclusions to this portion will be captured in the final report in March with a draft review period the latter part of February.
Question, Patrick, you know, the old cliche, too many cooks can spoil the broth, but is there any need or requirement for the firm in New Hampshire that did the historical site assessment in 2018 to be involved at this point in any way, shape, or form? And I'm not asking this question in terms of ERM's a top-notch firm and sounds like they're right on the ball here, right on the mark. But from a regulatory or procedural standpoint, I'm just curious if they're out of the picture now, or if you know, ERM were to find something to expand or change information or conclusion from the historical site assessment, would there be a need or an opportunity to go back to ground truth some of the historical site assessment?
I didn't catch the first part. So
I was curious if I forget the name of the firm in New Hampshire that did the historical site assessment.
RSCS.
Yeah, okay. I was just curious if they're out of the picture now totally, or would there be a need or requirement for them to be doing anything further at this point other than what they completed in 2018?
There's no requirement for them to be further involved. We'll certainly use them as far as, you know, backup information if needed, for any additional questions we have with the HSA that they provided. But with the team that we have currently executed for this work, we're confident that we'll be able to create the right product necessary to go forward in the cleanup of this site. And we have ERM as our LSP, with us as CDI being a contract to HDI. You know, the whole team has our own roles and responsibilities for this. I don't see any gaps in that.
Yeah, and Richard, you mentioned regulatorily speaking, there's no need for that outfit to be part of the process. You know, when we did the settlement agreement, we looked at the historical site assessment for its adequacy. We identified some gap areas and not significant ones. It was, you know, it was a good document. You know, looked at the right stuff in terms of, you know, kind of pointing people in a direction that they ought to be looking at for assessing this facility. So I think it was a good document for that. But it's not, you know, it's not enough of a document to complete the job that's underway now. So our goal is to continue to work with these folks and provide feedback, look at the information coming in. The settlement agreement requires that we approve whatever environmental work plan ultimately is the basis for their complete report from their environmental site assessment, initial one. So we're continuing to work towards that. You know, I don't see a need to go back to the historic site assessment to further inform that, other than what that document provides. And, you know, our expectation is that the work underway now is going to go you know, well beyond what that document did. So the folks on this should have an awful lot more information than the folks who did that work back in 2018.
Mm-hmm.
I see everybody here, Richard, you know, on this call, this meeting with our purpose here, you know, cleaning up the site safely, as it is supposed to be. And Mary Lampert, you know, you've been.
Yes, I have two questions. First, a broader procedural one. We would like total transparency. I'm sure you share that. And as far as the documents that you have and you're sending to DEP and DPH and comments back prior to the completion of this phase, where are they? And when will they be made available to this committee and the public? I've read the confidentiality section of the settlement, and unless something's redacted, there should not be a problem. So is there going to be a continual flow so we can look in greater depth into the very, very good overview you're giving, so it makes sense to us? That's question one. Question two, question two is as far as sampling. You said that there were split samples, and my question is, who determines which samples will be split? Is it a coordinated decision by DPH and you guys? or what?
All right, so the first question you're asking is for where's the information as we continue to perform characterization. We do have share drive that we have set up with our stakeholders, with Jack and Dave, to be able to have those documents to review, such as the site plans, the field plans, and other radiological documentation, Jack, like the DCGL derivation and such. And we'll continue to use that communicative tool with those stakeholders.
Yeah, but what about with this committee and with the public?
Yeah, no, Mary, that's a really good question. And we talked about that last, as Mark mentioned, we sit down about every 2 weeks or so and go over the progress. And you're asking, well, how do the folks on this committee get some insight into that? And that's something we've been talking about. We do get an awful lot of data on share drive. We have talked about trying to work with this committee to come up with a way to get more easily accessible information for the folks here. As I've mentioned a number of times, when submittals come into Mass DEP, that information is, for the most part, public information.
So do we have to FOIA it or what?
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt there, but that's, I don't think that's how we want to work that. You can, absolutely, but that's a cumbersome process that I don't think, kind of meets the spirit that we're trying to get to with the NDCAP. So, and Pat can jump in here if he wants to add anything to what I'm saying. But we have brought this up. We have been talking about it. We talked about it most recently a couple of weeks ago. And, I think it's really at this point incumbent on the CDI Holtec folks to give it a little more thought. They were committed to come up with a way that we could accomplish this, and I think that's going to mean in coordination with the chair and the vice chair of the NDCAP to figure out how to get information readily available so that we don't end up needing to go through a cumbersome process to get it released. And then in terms of, what about the Mass DP feedback, public health feedback? We're going to be getting some results on the sample evaluation in the coming days. That's going to be really insightful. That's all information that's going to be available. And we need to make that available easily. And then ultimately, you saw the goal of having a preliminary report in the March window, more fully developed, maybe something approaching a final report by May. Before the report can be determined to be final in terms of the settlement agreement, that's going to have to get signed off by the agencies. So the point of how we're doing this is the agencies sit with Holtec CDI regularly, work to a process where when these reports come out, they accomplish what the settlement agreement has established they need to accomplish. And then we affirm that in writing. So you all will have that as well. Mary?
That doesn't answer my question.
What was your question?
I mean, the question was, when will this committee and the public see this flow of data going back and forth and reports so that we can have some input into the adequacy that we think or questions that should be asked or further information gathered? Number one. Number two, as far as the sampling question, it was who and how is it determined what samples are split with VPH?
So let me see if I can answer question one and start on question two and then hand off to Jack. So question one, Holtec CDI needs to work with Pine and John to figure out what the best mechanism is to get this information to be readily available. They have told us that that is their intention, and we need to make that happen. That dialogue needs to happen soon. So I don't know, Pat, if you want to just affirm what I just said or correct it if it's wrong.
No, absolutely. Anything that's not business proprietary, we're willing to work through that process like we did with the HSA and provide that to the panel.
So Mary, we need to make that an item to report back on at the next NDCAP on sort of the efforts to get it done or to have it done. So I think, why don't we include that for our next meeting so we can, put some light and heat on that and get it done. And the second issue.
I just have a, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Rich, when Dave's done, can Jack Priest next, and then we'll go to you, Rich.
Sure,
So
thank
Jack, is going to answer your second question, Mary, relative to splits. But I'll quickly just say that ultimately the agencies decide how the splits are managed, and Jack can talk about that.
Right, so I want to talk, Dave talked about, or Mark said that they're expecting analytical data. That analytical data is not coming directly to the state agencies. It's coming in through Holtec and is still labeled as sensitive proprietary. So I can't, anything that I look at, I don't take it into the Department of Public Health. I go to the proprietary Holtec server and I review data and information on that proprietary Holtec server. So that's the first issue. How do you convert information that's the question. Let me rephrase the question for the next meeting that we should carry over. Holtec would describe how are they going to convert information that's in the sensitive proprietary server to a format that they're comfortable sharing with the members of the NDCAP.
And the Commonwealth is coming.
Correct. So once it's
But
made
just
public.
not Holtec's decision, I trust. Also, that you are comfortable in what's being put out.
Right. Okay. So
Is that correct?
that's correct. So does anybody object to that rephrasing of what we're asking for?
I
Dave
think
or Patrick?
I can get off mute. No, I don't have a problem with that. It is. That's the question. It's the same thing I dealt with the HSA. I know the HSA took a while, but
Right.
absolutely, that's what we want. We want the transparency.
So we would write that up, include it in the minutes, and then that's an item that we would track with owner of Pat O'Brien. Okay?
Mhm.
Good. Your second question was about split samples and how is that determined? So I explained a little bit about this process in the last meeting. I look at the site like a bullseye with rings, and we are starting kind of from the outer edges, working our way in. So my real areas of concern are going to be in the really radiologically affected, I'll call that the center of the bullseye. And right now we're at the outer edges working our way towards that. So I'm a little, I'll say it's all a concern, but I'm less concerned on the outer edges that we don't believe are radiologically impacted. So Holtec and the DPH are working together to put together an agreement document on the mechanics of what samples are going to be split, how many are going to be split, how are they collected, what are the volumes, how are they going to be transported, and then how are they going to be cross-indexed with, they're using GEL, an independent laboratory.
Mhm.
So how would those samples be cross-indexed so I can do a QA comparative to the GEL value that's determined? So they have provided some samples already to my Mass Environmental Radiation Laboratory, water samples that we're rerunning gross gamma beta for and tritium on. And I'll have those results and be able to compare them to the results that GEL did. So these are really the non-affected areas, and I don't expect to see radioactive material other than what we've identified as part of our tritium monitoring project right now. So these are kind of good models for what we want to have contained in like our master plan agreement for these split samples. And I expect to have that plan reviewed and approved probably by the end of February.
So it will be a mutual decision of what,
No, it's the process we're working together on is the mechanics of the process. Where do I take the sample? What's the volume? What do I collect it in? Who picks it up?
Mhm.
It's the DPH's decision on which samples do I want to
Okay.
collect.
There's opportunity to identify those samples in the field.
Right. Yep, I didn't get to that. So what Mark had agreed to, and that'll be part of our plan, is they put these, I'll call them sections of the pie. So as they put together these sections of the pie plans for what they're doing for radiological and non-radiological, I'll have an opportunity to say, hey, Mark, I want to take samples A, D, and G
Mhm.
of your A through Z samples that you're going to take. And those will be collected, split, set aside. My office will collect them. We'll do the analytical work on them. And then when GEL provides the results back to Holtec CDI, I'll be able to cross-reference them and say, yep, they found what we found. Or, hey, we found something different. Why did we find something different? And then it could be, we do additional sampling. You know, CDI, Holtec will have that same, I'll say thoroughness or QA of the sample results.
Okay, that was a good answer. Thank you.
Rich Rothstein.
Yeah, just going back, I thought Mark did an excellent presentation of what's been done right now with the phase one sampling, with the site assessment work going on. When these regulatory meetings take place between the state, ERM, CDI, I assume there's meeting minutes being taken, and who's doing that? And if we needed to see that, we being the panel, would that be possible, or is pretty much? I mean, the summaries we've been getting, I think, so far have been great overall. But as we get further along in the decommissioning, if we did want to see something in particular, I assume there's minutes, and they might be made available if need be.
There are no minutes, Rich. These are just work sessions. It's engineers and scientists getting together like this, talking about the process, talking about the work being done. And what we need to get to is what we're talking about, and that is the information that's produced, the sample results that are obtained, the reports that are developed. How does that all get out for easy access for distribution and review? Really, the sessions, it's an informal discussion. We sit down and we just, you've come into DEP plenty of times over the years, and you know how that goes. We sit down together, work through, like scientists working on something. So, I think the measure of how effective what we're doing with them is going to be is what's the quality of the product, and how well can we get it communicated to this group. If we're not able to communicate it to this group, then we're not doing our job well enough. And so I think that's kind of the challenge that, I'm taking away from today's session, that we need to follow up on. And, and we knew this was an issue we needed to step up on. So, let us sort of characterize, as Jack did moments ago, let us have some sort of report back for the next meeting, and let's advance the ball on this so we get information that folks need to see.
Sounds good.
Okay.
I have one question.
Go ahead, Pine.
It's a quick one, and I want to thank both Jack and Dave and Mark for that. I think it was very valuable, and I'm glad you're doing it, and I'm not. But I do want to see the report, so I'm eager for that. What's happening with the triangle that the town of Plymouth owns? Is there going to be a test, or are you blowing over that site? Are we going to assure that property that's in the middle there as a triangle is not adversely affected and remains that way.
I haven't had that detailed discussion, a specific discussion yet, but it's not part of the licensed property. So at this time, it is not part of the sample plan.
But it's corralled by the licensed property, yeah?
It is.
Would you guys talk about that, please, at one of your work sessions? I assume that it would depend on if and what you find in the surrounding area as to how important that is. But if you do find contamination, be it radiological or not, in the abutting areas, I would try to persuade you that you would have to do a test there as well.
I understand. And
So,
go ahead.
so I can speak to that. So yes, it's not licensed. It's corralled by licensed property. If we see radioactive material in the licensed property surrounding that corralled area, then the owner of the property would be required to perform surveys to demonstrate there is no radioactive byproduct material unlicensed on that owner-owned property.
Wait, which owner are we talking about?
Who owns the property? The town, right?
The town of Plymouth?
That's correct.
So if I own a piece of property and my neighbor dumps a whole boatload of contaminated material on my property line and it comes onto me, I got to clean it up.
That's correct. You're responsible for the radioactive material.
Really? Is that a flaw in our law, or where's that at?
It's just, so whoever owns the property. So let's say, yeah.
So I, as the property owner, would have to sue my neighbor in order to get it cleaned up, basically.
Yeah.
That's what you're saying.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah, you know, there's some nuances to that on non-rad, and Gerard will do a better job talking about that than I will. But, you know, for the non-rad, we have different categories of responsible parties. There's 4 or 5 categories, and it's we have folks that are causally liable. In other words, the folks that contributed to that happening have responsibility, as well as the property owner ultimately has responsibility as well. So within our non-rad programs, we pursue, you know, all responsible parties. We generally start with the folks that we believe are causally liable. There are ways to file for down gradient property status to protect your level of exposure. So, you know, so Gerard, if you want to add, or Jack.
Yeah,
sure.
let's just say, all right, so we're in a very low probability of that being affected area. So let's not put a bunch of effort and the carts before the horses until they get into that phase 2 and 3 surveillance. And if we have to come back and visit it, believe me, there'll be a bunch of lawyers involved in the triangle, the Plymouth triangle, on how that would be affected in liability. So I don't think the NDCAP needs to really spend a lot of time at this point until we get some more empirical data and have a better idea of what that could be.
No, I completely agree. It was really just a question, and I got an answer. Thank you.
So we have our own little Bermuda Triangle. Yeah, we noticed that when we looked at the big maps. But I have a question for Mark. So I think we're in phase 2, and there's a lot of historical questions about Powerhouse Road and an old dump site there. Nothing that's you know, we don't have a lot of written analytical data. There's a lot of I'll call it wives' tales about what may have gone on at some of those sites. There's an old dump site along Powerhouse Road. That's part of the phase 2 surveillance, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So we'll have actual sampling and people going through that area, walkabouts, to make sure that there's nothing unexpected or not documented in that area, correct?
That's correct. We have quite a bit of historical photos and historical documentation of activities at that time. But as I, look at the NDCAP team here, there's a lot of valuable experience here that can be tapped into. So
Right.
getting into that.
We would know, so from a science standpoint, walking across those areas with the sodium iodide detectors, measuring the ground, if there were any anomalies from, I hear the 1970s, we did this or this happened out there, we believe it would be readily identified.
That's correct. Background is much lower at those areas in the outer licensed property where we are limited, or we're limited with the industrial portion with the current buildings and the background that exists right now.
So that's of particular interest to me personally, to answer a lot of questions that have come up over the last dozen years or so about what's on that part of the property. So when Holtec CDI is actively doing surveys out there, you can expect my office to be engaged in that.
And also DEP, because we believe it was chemical,
Good.
correct?
Correct.
One other question.
Yes, well, yeah, the assessment needs to look at RAD and non-RAD, Mary, so
Yeah,
we'll
right,
all be
I know
fully
that.
engaged.
I noticed, you said as far as the sampling, you go down 6 inches. Correct?
What was that, Mary?
You mentioned that when we're doing sampling, except for groundwater, you went down 6 inches, correct?
That was
Surface
soil.
It was just surface soil samples from surface down to about 6 inches.
Yeah, now my question is, if there was, as there was in 1982, blowing the filters and large releases, and that landed on the soil, since 82, for example, how deep would it have gone? Would it have been missed if you just went 6 inches? That's my question.
Depends on the isotopic decay,
Yeah.
and how dense the soil is, your topography below the soil. There's quite a few factors that need to be taken into account to answer those questions, and the dose modeling that we're currently performing right now takes all that into account. So some areas, like around the new asphyxia pad, where your groundwater is as deep as 70 feet before you actually hit groundwater, but that's not everywhere. So it really just depends on where that proposed contamination were to land. But that's all I could say to that.
Right.
I'd love to sit with you at some time here in the future, because I'd like to ask you some questions as far as some history of the site as well, to help us out and have some good dialogue.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, and Mary, ultimately for the non-RAD soil evaluation, we'll be looking at more fractions than just the top 6 inches.
All right, let's go to Dave Johnson, Samantha Phillips for the IWG update or report, and then we can go back to discussion.
I don't think there's a heck of a lot more than I can add, and you folks are probably tired of hearing me talk, but I think I'd view this as an effective dialogue if we get through the IWG update and it's interactive like this with a lot of Q&A. Hopefully you folks feel the same way. So I would say, please, if there's any more questions of Jack and me, because I think we've covered a lot of Gerard, please ask those. And I know that Samantha has an update as well. Anything else on the site assessment or anything we've talked about today for Gerard, Jack, or me? Hearing none.
Actually, I do.
Go ahead, Pine.
Only to clarify, the schedule for the report out of the site assessment. My impression is that report will be a distillation of what you've agreed to are the real issues at the site. And in that report, we will have a map essentially of this is where we found this, and this. This is what we're going after. We'll let you know what the schedule is as soon as we can figure it out. kind of thing. Is that fair, or is it going to be a sort of detailed description of things that we're going to have to try and figure out what it means?
No, I think that's a pretty good overview. You know, the agencies are going to have to approve the report, you know, that comes out of the environmental assessment done under the settlement agreement. And, you know, you're seeing Holtec CDI's goal for the timing of that with a draft report in March and a more final report in May. And we're going to be weighing in along that time window. But ultimately, you know, when we see those reports, they're going to need to be consistent with what the settlement agreement lays out in terms of the completeness of the site assessment work plan. So that's going to be one measure of complying with the settlement agreement and sort of the agency's satisfaction with the generation of that report. Now, what comes with the schedule? So depending on what that report finds, if it does not find any reportable conditions under the non-RAD evaluation, then that's going to be indicative of a situation where not a lot of work needs to occur. Just because there's zero notification conditions does not necessarily mean there's zero work, but it's you know, it's a good indication that we've got a site that's not in need of a lot of work. If we have, on the other hand, this work finds a reportable condition, then they're going to that will bring them right into the Chapter 21E Massachusetts Contingency Plan review timeline, which sets up a timeline for doing the work. And rather than, I know it fairly well, but I'd rather just kind of refer this over to Gerard to do a better job than I will talking about the 21E process should we find a notification condition.
Okay. And actually, there's a lot of options under the MCP. Let's say they find some petroleum contamination above the standard, they have to notify. They can take measures to address that rather than, you know, get into the full comprehensive response actions. They may be able to take care of it fairly easily. If not, then they need to notify, after they notify in a year, they need to tier classify and then conduct comprehensive response actions, which under the MCP, they're allowed 5 years from tier classification to complete those. They can certainly do it quicker.
Great. So we should, just in terms of our schedule later, we should, when do you think it would be appropriate to begin an NDCAP discussion of that report? As soon as June, or do you think we would need more time to digest that?
I think as soon as we have a report to look at, you know, I think we have a couple of things for NDCAP. You've heard tonight the need to get more data in circulation so that when you look at the report, folks have also seen data. So that's kind of item one. And then you've also seen that the goal is to get some sort of draft report towards the end of March and another one towards May. I think those things ought to make it in circulation as soon as we have something to look at. That's going to be useful.
Yep.
And then just to kind of close out, to follow up on Gerard's overview timing wise, just so that we have you know, established clear expectations. As Gerard mentioned, there's a couple of sort of offshoots from the Massachusetts Contingency Plan for doing more limited scope work that can short circuit the timeline. Typically the timeline is more or less 6 years from when you find a notification condition. But Gerard and I have worked on projects, and I've talked about this before, that if we've got a lot of stuff going on, there's some real intricacies to the work, that timeline can be expanded, you know, with the approval of Mass DEP.
And when it comes to the notification, there are different notification categories as well. For some of the more potentially ones that have more greater issues, there's 2 and 72-hour notifications. Not really expecting to see much there. I think mostly what we'll run into is 120-day notification. So there's a time frame by which they need to notify. And it's a fairly straightforward process. So as they're evaluating the data, they will look and determine right away whether or not there's a notification condition. It may be that we hear about the notification before the report is completed.
Does the department have, either department have a suspect list for this site? You know, I mean, all industrial areas have their specific sorts of things you gotta, is there one for this, or is it so general and broad that that's not useful?
So the, Gerard will jump in and correct me if I don't fill in the details, but
You don't have to, yeah.
so there, you know, the historic site assessment is the jumping off point for the contaminants of concern. And that's what you're talking about, Pine. You know, what are the contaminants of concern? So to figure that out, you look at, you know, what have they stored there for petroleum products, hazardous materials? What is the history of releases out there that they've notified Mass DEP for? And there are releases that they've notified us for. So they've had LSPs out there. And, you know, what do they do out there? So, you know, what are some of the rumors out there that you folks have heard? So you want to look at kind of what are the things that there's a reasonable likelihood might have been spilled or released on the property. And that's where you start. And then once you get in there and you start sampling, you know, generally the sampling methodology you use, they don't look for one particular thing. It's usually a suite of chemicals within particular families that might also lead you down a particular road. So, so I wouldn't say that there's a concrete fixed, list of contaminants of concern yet, but we have a very good idea of what those are from the historic site assessment and the work underway. And we're going to have a better idea when we start getting some sample data. So I didn't probably leave Gerard much to say there,
nope.
but if I avoid to fill, please do.
That's consistent with the Department of Public Health RAD control program as well.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? All right, moving on to the next agenda item.
Well, hang on a minute. I think Sam had something to reply relative to a couple of emails.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening. I just wanted to kind of close the loop on the email traffic between Mary and Pat and training related to the facility. So we were able to connect this afternoon, and my recommendation to this group is that we do meet quarterly with the public safety leadership from the former EPZ communities and Holtec, MEMA, and talk about training opportunities. And so we're going to work this issue. I think there's a little bit of a disconnect between primary response agencies and how mutual aid will work. But I just wanted to sort of acknowledge that we have this, and it's something that we're kind of diving deep into and can work really closely with Chief Nord, who shared the concern with Mary, to ensure that his training needs are met and come up with some solutions. So more to come on that, but the Pilgrim Working Group, which is this public safety committee, I think is a really good platform for that conversation.
Thanks very much, Sam. I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, I'm glad the subject came up because it was a real concern of our emergency management director, fire chief, and also many of the workers, that the training at present wasn't satisfactory. And so it's in all of our interest, whether it's Holtec, Plymouth, all the different communities, that the trainers, the firemen that would be called in mutual aid feel they've been properly trained, that they understand whether they have badges, they understand also where they could be decontaminated, that they understand what hospitals are available to them, just the whole process. And an understanding of what the site's like. Because our folks, as you appreciate, our firemen, our fire chief feels that they're an integral part of safety, and they want to do the best job, as you do, possible. So thank you. That's great.
Yeah, and just a follow-up on that, the training that's been provided over the course of years is still very relevant. So if anything, and there was training provided by Holtec just prior to kind of the decommissioning. So, I think it's just making sure that the ongoing training needs are meeting the requirements, and, there might be an opportunity for, just modifying the approach now that we're in the stage of the process that we're in.
Oh, that's great.
Okay. Moving along to the next agenda item. So when the annual report was submitted, there was a cover letter that was signed by myself and Pine. And there was a formal invitation giving to the governor to potentially Zoom in with us early this year and discuss the spent fuel, especially long-term solutions, because we all know that the federal government has abdicated their responsibility here. So communication has gotten back to the committee that it looks like the governor cannot participate, but he will allow, I think her name is Kathleen Theorides, is that correct? Secretary of Environmental and Energy, or Energy and Environmental Affairs, to pinch hit for him. So just wanted to have a quick little discussion on this. You're just in preparation for having the secretary maybe for 15 minutes Zoom in with us in February, March, or April, and what are everyone's thoughts on this issue?
Well, I don't understand what your point is. I mean, what is the purpose of the meeting? Is it an assessment of where we stand on infant storage? Is it an assessment of the status of?
Well, at this stage of the game, Mary, I think we know that, or we anticipate certainly that potentially in perpetuity, they're going to stand in these casks and just stare at the Atlantic Ocean for as longer than any of us are going to be here. So if the federal government is going to abdicate their responsibility, is there something we can do at the state level where maybe somebody could just at least start some potential, a little bit of momentum, I don't know, bundling the New England states together or the Northeast, or is there something we can do here differently so that, at least we're communicating effectively to the state that we need them to step up because the federal government's not going to.
What about having someone from Markey's staff? Because I'm thinking of the Vermont and New York representatives who are trying to get money for the host community for the cost of having this stuff on site, etc.
I think in November or October, we had a brand new staff member for Senator Markey who participated in the meeting, or at least he zoomed in and, witnessed it, or, watched it go on, and he introduced himself late. So we could always reach out to him because I think he's located on the South Shore now and have him participate. But I certainly want to have the secretary weigh in.
I think the point initially was coming off of many discussions we had with Sean as chair, that we don't have the expertise or resources to pursue solutions on our own as NDCAP, and that we need to make sure that the state, I know DEP is doing a good job, and DPH and MEMA is doing a good job with the secretary, but to try to shape a solution track that draws in more of the resources of the state to help address the problem, and recognize that Maine's got the problem, Vermont's got the problem, Connecticut's got the problem, New Hampshire's got the problem, New York's got the problem, and Massachusetts certainly has the problem. And is there a more innovative and productive way that we can begin to think about all that waste than just storing it on the hill? And that bringing the secretary in with the and I'm not saying don't bring in Senator Markey's aide or Senator Markey himself and Elizabeth Warren herself, because I think the federal government does have a part to play here. And I don't think Holtec would disagree with that. But so to try to jump us off into a productive venue, I don't want to sit here stressing over berms around the damn waste fuel for the rest of my life. And I can see that easily happening. So I want to get more productive, more innovative, and I think bringing in some more state resources, some more educational resources that this state possesses is called for, at least.
And are you planning to include the integrity of the canisters in monitoring, or just?
I can barely understand you, Mary. I don't know.
No, I'm sorry. Are you planning to include the integrity of the canisters over a longer period and monitoring of the canisters?
I'm intending to include the fact that it's a global problem. Yeah,
Okay.
I have no bounds on this, but what I'm interested in tonight is bringing the rest of the panel's interest up to a higher level so that we don't waste her time. She's a smart person. She's an effective person. I think that if we can get more resources to the mission, to the table, to the solution, that we'll all be better off for that. And I think there's a lot more to be done besides just cleaning up the site.
Mary, you jogged my memory about Vermont and New York, and I think one or two other states petitioning the federal government to provide support to host communities. Do you recall if any of our state or federal or senators from Massachusetts have been involved with those other states or are involved with that petition, if that's the right word, to the federal government? And if not, wouldn't that be the next starting point to get them involved if they weren't involved for whatever reason? I just don't recall. I remember you circulating something on those other states petitioning, New England states and New York, but I just don't remember if Massachusetts was included at the time. And if not, it would seem that they already got the ball rolling. I don't know what the status is of that, but if it's still in the discussion stage, that might be a good point for some representation from Massachusetts to be involved.
You realize this is the second dry fuel storage site in Massachusetts, right? So 100 miles to our west in Rowe, we've got another dry fuel storage facility. So I think our focus here on this NDCAP, I talked about the bullseye, is shrinking the rings of the bullseye to minimize where that center is going to be. And that's where we can be most useful to ensure that the site is cleaned up, that the buildings are demolished and the materials safely disposed of, and recognizing that the issue of dry fuel storage is a larger issue that's going to be beyond, I'll say, the capability for this committee to remove. Not that we can't leverage and provide input to our government team on what's going to be remaining. But I think, we've got 7 years here where we're trying to clean up a site, decommission, knock down buildings, decommission our reactor, and safely move and store that fuel out.
Jack, I agree with your point, but I'm gathering, I'm glad you brought up Rowe. And I guess it sounds like nothing's happened in the federal front, at least with Rowe, in terms of what some of the other New England states are trying to push there.
So there's a new NRC commissioner last week. We've got a new federal government. We've got a new president, and I think it will be telling over the next couple of months if it's going to be a continuation of little action, or whether there'll be a push, for Texas or wherever the final or interim repository would be, and we'll have an opportunity to provide input. But my job, what I'm focusing on over the next few years, is getting that site safely cleaned up.
I certainly
one
think, though, if we have a representative from Governor Baker's office attending our Zoom meeting, that wouldn't hurt to just bring this point up and let our executive officials at the state work with the executive officials if they choose to.
Fair enough.
This topic. That's where I was trying to
Yep.
come from.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Well,
And I think,
Dave Johnson and then Kevin O'Reilly. Dave.
I was, good discussion. I didn't see the invitation, but I do think we should try to make effective use of the, 15 or whatever minutes that Pine and John, you think we're going to have with the secretary, and give her an indication of what we hope to speak about so that it's a productive meeting.
Absolutely.
Mr. O'Reilly.
I think a simple solution on the feds is just to reach out to Jimmy Cantwell, who lives in, I think it's either Situate or Marshfield, who is Markey's chief of staff, and just ask for an update on any federal movement. I think that would, rather than see if we can get him at a meeting, just see if we can get an email to him and ask for an update, because he's well aware of what's going on down here.
Okay. Anyone else? All right, moving along. Let's just take a few minutes. Annual report feedback and planning for this year's report. It's January of 21. The committee just completed and submitted their third report, Herculean effort on behalf of Mr. Grassi and Ms. Dubois. If anybody else out there did some heavy lifting and I didn't reference your name, I apologize. But we know that it got up the ladder and it got into the governor's office. And if anybody had any thoughts as we head into the next 11 months, as far as getting out ahead of that and not leaving it for the last minute, is there anything we can do proactively so that it's not falling on the backs of a few individuals to put this whole thing together at the last minute? Mr. Grassi.
Thank you very much, John. Just one item. When I had to go to the minutes on the state website to get the monthly minutes for the period of the time of the report, I found that there was one or two missing, and I just want to encourage you, John and Pine, to make sure that we get the minutes put together and then submitted to the state, because it really turned out to be a very helpful item for us to use to compile the annual report.
Okay.
I kind of want to know if there's any volunteers that are going to be willing to write the next one. Might want to think about that, because it's good to keep good notes.
Go ahead, Paul.
I must have unintendedly moved. I had no comment at this time. Thank you, Mr. Mahoney.
That's very unlike you.
I'm doing my best, sir.
Okay.
I think one of the challenges, and this maybe became self-evident in 2020, is we have a change of the guard, I guess, in June, of who's chairing, co-chairing, vice chairing the panel, and I don't know if that had some impact too in terms of planning and execution. I mean, it was great that Sean and Kevin were the chair and vice chairs for the last prior 3 years. But, I think when you have a change of the guard there, that in itself might create a little challenge too in terms of timing and circumstance.
John, let's go on. I think we're cutting the public pretty short here.
Okay, all right, yeah, let's move on to the public, and I think we've already spent some time on topics for the future meeting, Pine, that I think we've made notations of that, so let's go to the public. Do you have anybody lined up in the queue?
There's somebody in the chat from the Vineyard who has a question, and I don't know whether this is a Sam question or a Pat and team question.
All right, do you want me to read this?
Yeah, why don't you just read it? Yeah.
All right, so I don't know if everybody can see this on their screen, but there's an individual, says he's from the Vineyard Times. Okay. Yeah, Vineyard Times. Could you folks walk through what the firefighting response would look like if a fire broke out in one of the canisters meant to hold fuel rods removed from the pool? Can you speak to what the radioactive composition of the smoke that would issue from such a fire? Could you speak to what Holtec's role is in fighting such a fire versus what the town of Plymouth's role would be? And could you speak to what the scale of the plume might be if a canister were fully engulfed?
And then just to set the stage here, we also have a couple of hands up on deck from the public.
So I don't know if that's something.
Yeah, so I'll talk. I actually did reach out. I know Rich, I've dealt with him before in the past at the Martha's Vineyard Times. I did just send him a set of slides that I had recently used at the NDCAP in New York for IPAC that spoke to how the high storm 100s are built. It's concrete and steel, so you don't have combustible material that's part of those. And then just general explanations of what hazards those have been tested or built to withstand, including brush fires around those casts. So like I said, they're not combustible. There's no way for the canister to spontaneously combust. And we've analyzed how they can withstand external fires, including crashing an F-16 laden with fuel into them. So I did share those with Rich kind of in the interim while some of our discussion was going on. To the question of the town of Plymouth's role, the town of Plymouth is our first responder that the fire department has been on site this past year and trained to respond to fires. Most recently, I think it was the November meeting, I did provide a couple pictures that showed one of the training drills we had on site with them. That was a drill that assumed, and Dave Noyes would know offhand if I'm wrong, but I think we played it as a fire inside the reactor building that they were responding to.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay, so yeah, they are first responder. We do have on-site staff that would work with them as part of our response plan for anything like that. So.
All right, Pine. You got some people out there want to call?
Diane Turco. Go ahead, Diane.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're all safe and well. I just have a question. I was looking at the picture of the ISFSI, Patrick, that you put up in the wall, and that's to prevent vehicles from going onto the property. The building in the background, is that going to be taken down? That you can see through the woods?
Hold on, so let me pull them up real quick because I know there was two pictures and one had one building and one had the other. Hold on one second. Or a ton, because one of them is the new security building that's part of the pad. So I just want to pull it up. So okay, so let me if you guys just let me share my screen while we're talking, because I think that'll help explain what's what here. And I'm not going to throw it completely up into where is it here? All right, of course now I can't see it on my own screen. Hold on 1 second. So this building here on the oh wait, I just moved it. Sorry. Yeah, that was mine. It's because I had the pictures over my hold on 1 second. Sorry. There we go. Let me just move all your faces and I'll be much better off. So this building in here that you can see that's kind of obscured through the trees, that's the new security building. Pine was in that today when she came up for a visit. This right here is the wastewater treatment facility. That will be at some point during our decommissioning. That'll be taken offline and decommissioned. This, I think, is just a sheet metal building, and I believe it's the same. It will be removed during the process.
Now, is the pad in front of the building?
No.
It's on the other side?
Correct.
Okay. Well, so I understand there's shrubbery being planted there.
Correct.
All right, now, is the highest height of any wall around this ISFSI 4 feet?
That's the vehicle barrier system that goes around it. That's when you say wall, yes, wall. It is not the highest fencing that is around the facility.
But the highest, like, solid barrier?
I would say a fence is a solid barrier, so no.
Well, I mean, a fence, you could like shoot through it.
Sure.
Okay, so that's my point is, it's good that it's protected, that a vehicle can't go on the property, but there are shoulder launched weapons that are very powerful that could go over a 4-foot wall and in between shrubbery. And that's a big concern, that the casts will be out in the open, and it's only protected from vehicle entrance and not really a terrorist kind of attack.
Well, the casts themselves are a barrier, you know, based on their design and how they're built. There's a barrier, and that's actually some of the material I just shared with Rich at the Martha's Vineyard time. It shows you how and I can pull it up quickly while we're
Right.
talking.
There's also contradictory documentation by Dr. Gordon Thompson, who has shown that the concrete could be pierced by weapons that are on the open market right now.
So while we're talking, you know,
And
this
that
is
each canister,
this is
yeah.
a high cast system. So you have 27 inches of steel and concrete on the outside overback.
Mhm.
You have the 1/2-inch canister that you guys reference all the time of stainless steel. You have the basket, the assembly. You have a 9.5-inch lid and a 19-inch overpass. That's all steel and concrete. So then when you go and actually look at what we've analyzed for, you've analyzed for types of missiles, you know, and I say missiles not in the sense of a weapon missile, but something that would be airborne and could hit these facility cask systems. And these reports show that they can withstand, like I said before, an F-16 laden with fuel hitting them, and that they do not do that. So that I understand what you're trying to say, Diane, where you can have a number of things, but there are a number of things that these are analyzed for that are very robust systems that these casks are.
Right, and that's whole text analysis, and they have a financial reason to be doing this, but there are also contradictory reports that show that they can be the barrier could be broken, and so this wall is really not protecting the casks. It's just
Yes,
keeping
it is. It's a licensed vehicle barrier system according to NRC regulations to provide safety from vehicles that would try to access the site.
Okay.
You can ask Pine, who was there today, but
Okay.
is an observer, kind of a fair observer. She saw the integrity of those today when she was there.
Right, and I'm not questioning the integrity of the wall, but what I have to say is also too that the NRC has not changed any of their requirements for security since 2008, when I walked on the property with some reporters and we stood there for 25 minutes and no one came out. We eyeballed the canisters. So that's a major concern that I have brought up many, many times.
That's
And
right, Diane,
yeah.
Diane, you have brought it up. Everybody is aware of it, and James is waiting patiently.
Okay, well, nothing's being done, Pine, so I'm still concerned.
I don't, well,
You know,
I would
it's
say, well, first of all, that's one of the reasons why we're inviting the Secretary of Environmental Affairs, okay, to try and get some more interest in it. But so I wouldn't say that, and I would also say that the level of effort that is being applied up there is very substantial. So I don't think that arguing a difference of opinion, though, right now is going to get us anywhere. So can we let Jim go?
Okay, so well, good luck with shrubbery. Thank you.
No, that's for the people that like shrubbery.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Diane.
Am I on?
Yes.
You are.
I guess quickly, Diane did mention that there is a lot of documentation that calls the NRC tests and what Patrick has called into serious question. And I'd suggest people take a look at some of that before they come down southly on one side or the other. I guess my major point tonight, because we are clearly running short of time, is let me start with Jack's suggestion on questions. I think it's an extraordinarily good idea to keep a list of the questions that have been raised at meetings and not answered, because historically, an awful lot of stuff has gotten lost and never has gotten answered. I would suggest that if you're going to do that and not have things wait 2 or 3 meetings before you get back to it, someone is going to have to create a list of questions out of probably the draft minutes and put those out in advance on the agenda for the coming meeting for things that will be talked about, because otherwise things are just going to go on for months. And it would also not hurt if there was a way to integrate into that list questions that have been submitted in the interim between the meetings. These questions need to be answered, and they need to be answered efficiently.
Well, I think you're neighbors or something with one of the panelists. So if you guys could work together to help us with the list, I'll sort through it and get it on the agenda. But that would be very helpful.
No, normally neighbors, right? The other question really comes down to the question of really transparency. There is a lot of information. David's talked about the shared site. I assume there are an awful lot of documents on that site. He talked about the HSA that I know this panel has been requesting a copy of for a long, long time. Has the panel received it?
Yes, we got it just before the last meeting. I think it was November the 15th.
Could that be posted on the website?
Isn't it already? I think it is.
I don't
You
think
know what? I want to apologize. I've said many times that I was going to be working with Kim and with Tori at EEA, and it's on me.
Because obviously
But we have to reorganize that site so that things can be found more easily. The annual report isn't even up, so we'll be doing that. Once this week is over, I'll be able to pay attention to it. So again, if you want to provide me some, I know Mary sent me a good list in early December when I was doing the annual report. I couldn't deal with it then, but I'm almost there. But if somebody else wants to help me on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, that's great, because we all, this was 2 or 3 meetings ago, we had an extended discussion on the fact that the website could be an awful lot more informative than now.
You're absolutely right about that. And
I guess the second question on information is, my understanding, and Dave Johnson agrees, that basically anything, starting point is that anything goes into the Commonwealth or comes out of it is public information, publicly available. The settlement agreement provides a rather specific procedure that Holtec has to follow if it submits any information to the Commonwealth and wants it not to become public. It's quite clear that they have to identify specifically what is or is not protected under Mass state law from disclosure, and also provide a redacted version. I don't know what they have actually marked, Dave, on anything they put in. My guess is very, very little. I don't know whether they have submitted anything approaching a redacted version, but the settlement agreement clearly requires them to do so. And my view is, and Dave, I'd love to have an opportunity just to talk through and see if we differ on this, is that anything that has gone either way that was not at the outset marked as protected against disclosure, and as to which Holtec has not provided the required redacted version, should be freely available to the public by FOA, and frankly, electronic document FOA is really fairly easy. But how do we accomplish this in an efficient way? Because I think, unfortunately, I think Holtec, CDI, and I are going to have very different views on what is business sensitive. And I don't think business sensitive is a protected category. And I'd love to talk through with you how we efficiently might handle this.
Do you have a list of things that you're waiting for besides the HSA, which I can email to you?
Frankly, my starting point would be the shared site and anything that's been submitted in the course of sending in stuff under the settlement agreement. That is public information, unless it has met the requirements set forth in the settlement agreement.
Dave?
So I think I largely agree with Jim. I'm not quite as certain as he is that anything that comes into the shared site would meet that, in so much as, it's a shared access drive right now. It's not as though, and frankly, I don't know if that would meet the disclosure requirements, but I don't think that's really, Jim, please let me just finish. I don't think we really need to answer that question, hopefully, because, I'm hoping that next meeting we'll figure out a way to get that stuff out there. you know, it's sample plans. Holtec CDI has mentioned a couple of things that they would like to keep business confidential, and business confidential is a category. And there's a few things, and it's, from what they've explained to Jack and me, I don't think it's anything that's going to give people heartburn. It's, some technologies by some companies that they're using to do certain things to evaluate impact levels. So, and if that gets redacted and that gives people heartburn, then we talk about, how vital it is and if it can come out. So, so rather than kind of knocking heads on this, I think we largely agree. And so I think we got to figure out how to get it out there, whether that's what we sort out with Tori, or whether it's something that Patrick and his crew comes up with, that's a user-friendly way to get at it. Let's get it done.
Yeah, and I agree with you. This is not worth knocking heads about, but I think we need to understand what the procedure is. Just, this will be my last statement, that if what had been filed in October had included everything that was supposed to be in that document according to the settlement agreement, and I don't think there's anybody here who can say that it approached doing that, that would be a good place to start, everything that should have been in that document.
Talking about the HSA or the?
No, I'm talking about the submission that was made in October that was supposed to satisfy all the requirements of Section 11 of the settlement agreement. And it utterly failed to do so, as everybody recognizes. If that document
Jim, so Pine, what Jim is talking about is the information that's on the share drive. That's the stuff that Jack and I and Gerard have been looking at. And it's, it's sample plans, it's that kind of stuff that came in to augment the October submittal. And that is I agree with Jim, we've got to figure out how to get that stuff out there. And as I mentioned, there's a couple of nuggets in there that CDI Holtec believes is business confidential. I don't think it'll give anybody heartburn when they see sort of how limited that is, the scope of that.
Well,
so let's get it out there.
Guys, if you guys could think about kind of what category to call that, you know what I mean? Because that's the thing about organizing the website. Right now it's organized by meeting, and I don't think that's a very effective way
Oh, it would be
to go find it.
Site assessment.
Yeah, site assessment.
Site assessment. Then resources, documents, the date, who submitted it, and then the title of the document, and you could open it up.
Pine,
Go ahead, Jack.
Pine, you might, and John, you might take a look at New York's website and Vermont's website. It might give you an idea how better align the website so it's easier to plunk information in and then for people to look at information and draw off of it. We don't need to reinvent the wheel.
You might talk to Tori about that the next time you're talking
Yeah,
to her.
we will. Dave and I will talk about that and talk about Tori.
Right.
Talk to Tori about how that's set up.
I don't want
Yeah,
to.
right now it's just kind of, hyperlinks on that page because there wasn't a lot of information. And I agree with Jim and some of the other members that, as time goes on and this project continues, we're going to have more information that's on there. And they've already set up their websites to retrieve that information. I think it will help us. So I'll take that to talk to Tori and Dave at our next meeting on
Thank you.
how the web page is set up.
Yeah, I think she's listening in anyway, so you won't have to explain everything.
Okay.
All right, Pine, anyone else on the queue in the public that wants to weigh in?
Nobody else with their hand up. No, I
Nope.
want to give them a last chance here. I'm not seeing anything.
Okay, all right. Look forward to seeing everybody in February. Is there a motion to adjourn? Pat O'Brien with a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Dave Johnson.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. All right, I've got Kansas City in the Super Bowl. We'll find out in February.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.